This is something I get asked by clients all the time. Should I do an elimination diet?
Ooh, okay. Should I do an elimination? They
Wait,
are
wait, wait.
getting very popular.
Can I guess what you're going to say?
Please.
Are you going to say it depends?
Okay.
AKA our answer to everything?
I'm not needed here. An elimination diet definitely depends. One of the things I like to think about is, why are we eliminating?
Yeah.
That's first things first.
And what are we eliminating?
Yes. And
Maybe
once
next.
we know why, then we can say what might be worth eliminating. There's a tendency to just like blanket remove things, and that's largely people throwing something at the wall to see if it sticks.
You can find a lot of random lists on the internet of elimination diets for all sorts of reasons.
This helped me with a problem that you may not have.
But you should still try it.
But you should try it because it may help you.
And buy my detox tea. Discount code in my bio.
Discount code in link in bio. Oh, God. Elimination diets, though, I will say, they do have a lot of value, especially for people that are in insane amounts of pain and discomfort. And so they can be extremely helpful.
Sorry, what type of pain and discomfort?
That depends. It can be gastrointestinal pain and discomfort. It can be actual like full body inflammation, like autoimmune pain and discomfort.
Yep.
Those would be probably the two big ones that we would see on a regular basis.
Yeah,
and
that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah. And in both of those instances, an elimination diet can be one of the few things a person has that they can do, right? They have to wait for the doctor. They have to wait for the medications. They have to wait for the testing, but they can do this experiment at home, right? And so I understand why it comes up and why it's such an opportunity. And also, in a lot of instances, food can be the culprit or it can be a contributor. Most of the time it's a contributor, which is to say it's not the main problem, but it could be exacerbating the problem, right? It's to say that the inflammatory effects of certain foods are adding a small amount of inflammation to a highly inflamed system. But then it becomes in your pie chart of pain, what percent of the pain does the food take away? Is it 10%? Because if so, we've probably got some upstream work to do. Is it 90%? Because if that's the case, then food may have really been the piece of the puzzle. And so our role as dietitians is really to hear those people out. And if you're going to do an elimination diet, I actually love to ask, should you do an elimination or should you do a reverse elimination?
Wait, let's back up then. Could you sort of define, for those who don't know, what is an elimination diet, so then we can kind of understand what would be a reverse elimination?
Fantastic. Yes. So, for example, an elimination diet would be take a client who has rheumatoid arthritis. And we do see evidence that gluten, dairy, and nightshade vegetables, all three of those areas of our food, have effects on the body and can exacerbate the rheumatoid arthritis. So they don't cause it, but they can definitely contribute to a flare-up and increase the flare-up.
And a lot of people find that removing one or multiple of those groups can result in a reduction in symptoms.
Correct. And with dairy, it's typically, again, it's the protein in dairy that causes this. The gluten is actually wheat protein, so it's the protein in wheat. And then the nightshades, it's not even technically the protein at that point. It's actually some of the compounds that are in nightshade vegetables, specifically your tomatoes, potatoes, peppers, those kind of things.
All very healthy foods, right? But they may have compounds for these individuals that might exacerbate their symptoms. Yeah.
I had a client one time that said, he came in and he goes, hey, my one buddy, he doesn't eat tomatoes because it hurts his joints. And I wanted to ask you because I thought tomatoes were healthy. And I said, well, they are. They're super nutritious, rich in lycopene, great source of fiber, but they're not good for him. I said, it sounds like he might have rheumatoid arthritis. He goes, oh, that's what it's called. And I said, that specific disorder requires that specific elimination.
Right.
That doesn't mean the entire world should stop eating tomatoes.
Yeah.
And what I just said there, we've now done with gluten-free, with celiac or gluten intolerance and a variety of inflammatory conditions, noting that autoimmune disorders are wreaking havoc across our nation, and we don't have a great answer for it. We don't fully understand it. It's probably multifactorial. It's a lot of things going on, but an elimination diet, it's really easy to say, well, get rid of dairy and gluten. The only thing that's interesting is then you go, okay, well, when you get rid of those things, how does your diet change? Well, you start eating a lot of plants, a lot of produce, and a lot of proteins. You start eating a very like Mediterranean, minimally processed diet. So is it the actual removal of the gluten specifically? Is it the actual removal of the dairy specifically? Or in this instance, in this hypothetical we're talking about, is it that you changed your diet so dramatically?
Yeah.
And that's where a reintroduction becomes important, because then you can have your new baseline of Mediterranean style eating as an example, and then you add back some Greek yogurt. Does it have an effect? So it's to say that you start to notice, especially with elimination diets, the thing I'd want to highlight and we can dig into is elimination diets have to go both ways so that you can rule out and rule in. We need to make sure we don't just have placebo effect and we get rid of something and then we think that it's what fixed us. And then we also demonize that ingredient unnecessarily because we actually, without realizing it, made changes along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And elimination diets, the nature of them is that you are eliminating usually a pretty lengthy list of foods. Not always, but oftentimes that is what it entails. And so we need to consider the whole person and see, okay, maybe this would improve the rheumatoid arthritis or the IBS or whatever it is that they're dealing with. Of course, we need that reintroduction. That's going to be crucial. But even within the context of that, we need to look at the whole person. One thing I'm always considering as in training for becoming an eating disorder specialist is, how will this impact their relationship with food? We know people with GI disorders are also more predisposed to eating disorders. And so potentially something as extreme as an elimination diet might not be appropriate for them. Not even just in the realm of like relationship with food, but also when you're removing things, you have to consider what nutrients are now lacking from your diet and for how long can we actually sustain without those nutrients. Is there something we need to be supplementing in? Of course, that's where a dietitian can be super useful. And then I think the reintroduction is key, because if you want to do a true elimination diet, it is, a pretty rigorous process. You do need to be pretty exacting, right? So you do need to be paying close attention to trace, ingredients and things that might be present in just small amounts. And then when we reintroduce them, we want to do it in a very methodical way so that we can actually determine what is harming versus potentially helping. And then another thing I think of is even within the realm of cutting out something like dairy. Well, there's multiple things within just dairy itself that could be potentially causing an issue. And that's always something I try to parse out with the client. So you mentioned reintroducing something like Greek yogurt to start. Well, that's great because Greek yogurt, because it's naturally lactose free because of how the fermentation process breaks down the lactose. If there is something like a lactose intolerance that's contributing to an issue, we would know if they were able to successfully reintroduce Greek yogurt that it wasn't, let's say the casein or the whey in the dairy.
Exactly. And that becomes that piece of, is it that food? And then in that food, what is the issue? Because somebody may be able to go dairy free, but it's because of the casein protein, which means they can still have whey products. Or to your point, it could be a lactose issue, more of a lactose intolerance, in which case they could be dealing with some, they could still consume the protein aspects, which means some cheeses and some yogurts and things may be on the, still on the table. So it's important to recognize that. And then also it becomes the other piece, which is the next step of it, which is, when they were eating dairy, was it because they were living a fast-paced lifestyle and grabbing lunch on the go, and the thing they replaced it with was a meal with a fork where they actually sat down? So is their digestion better because of the removal of the dairy, or is it because the removal of dairy forced them to slow their life down to eat its replacement, and the dairy wasn't actually the villain, it was actually a victim of your poor time management?
Yeah.
And so this, you start to hear where it's really easy to use elimination diets to try and identify the villain of the equation. But if you don't really understand this world, you're going to sometimes blame the wrong thing. And then you end up developing a negative relationship with that, a fear of that. And as you said, that can develop into eating disorders. And we are seeing ARFID, which, associated food restrictive intake disorder. It is an eating disorder when, said simply, when somebody has a traumatic or negative experience associated with a set of foods or a food, and then basically develops fear of it and anxiety over it and has all sorts of struggles with it. And if you're playing villain, find the villain, and you blame the wrong thing, you can develop an ARFID level association or trauma with a food that wasn't actually the problem. So we see, unfortunately, casual elimination diet, just recommending, hey, just get rid of all this or get rid of these things. It's such a casual toss as a recommendation. It comes up in conversations everywhere. Like,
Even
have you
in
tried getting rid of gluten? It changed my life. Have you tried
even in
getting
your
rid of
doctor's
dairy?
office, I
Yeah,
hear this advice being given to my clients. I'm
all the
like,
time. They have 5 minutes, and so they're always looking for the buzzwords. Get rid of gluten and dairy.
mhm,
See you in 6 months.
yeah.
No direction, no follow through. And so I think this is one of those things where if you're going to go through an elimination, having a Sherpa, a guide that genuinely understands what you're removing, why you're removing it, what the downstream consequences of that are, what the potential benefits of that are, so that you can move forward in a way that is actually sure-footed, but also customized to you. Because we've just in a casual conversation, we've brought up like 5 different reasons for elimination.
Mhm.
One of the things I like to make sure I do with patients and we work with our team to do is ask the question, is it time to do an elimination diet or a reverse elimination diet?
Tell us about the reverse
Yeah.
elimination.
So let's first acknowledge what the core elimination diet is. It is when someone is so miserable and they are so desperate for relief, and we are highly suspicious that it is food, but because we want to get them relief first before answers, we remove literally everything that we think could be the problem to get them relief. And then we assess their pie chart of pain in 2 weeks and say, hey, did removing this work? And it might be gluten and dairy and maybe the entire FODMAP. We'll use the FODMAP diet. So for those of you unfamiliar, the FODMAP diet came out in 2010 from Monash University in Australia. It was created by dietitians, and it identifies the carbohydrate types that our body struggles to digest, and it can create all sorts of gut inflammation and irritation. And so there's 6 types of FODMAPs. You can start by just getting rid of all 6. And then in 2 weeks, we would know if food was really a big piece of this. In 2 weeks, if there's no benefit, then this isn't the problem. We are legitimately barking up the wrong tree. If there's a mild improvement, it suggests that it's associated. It may not be the core problem, but we're getting close. If it's a massive improvement, then we know that we removed the issue. Now, was it all 6 of them? And this is where, perfect example, doctors will now toss out, here's the FODMAP diet, go. And people think it's their diet for life. And the FODMAP elimination is meant to be a 6 to 8 week removal to assess the pie chart of pain, to see how much better you can feel, followed by a staggered and intentional reintroduction, ideally with a dietitian who's able to say, hey, we're most suspicious of these, so let's add these back first because we're less suspicious of these.
Mm-hmm.
And let's add it back and see, you're still feeling great. Boom, add these back. You're still feeling great. Add these back. Oh, you started to notice a mild version of some of that symptomology. Let's remove it. So we start to basically inch our way forward. So that's a traditional elimination diet. Usually takes 6 to 8 weeks. It's usually a 4-week wash period. And this is whether you're talking FODMAP or autoimmune protocol or any of the other diets that kind of fall in that realm. A 4 to 6 week wash followed by what can be a 6 to 8 week reintroduction phase where you're basically dipping your toes in the water strategically. That's the part that most people skip. And so they end up just eliminating foods and being afraid of things and blaming things that aren't even in the conversation.
Mm-hmm. You have to be organized to do this.
You do. And you have to be, there's a level of discipline in the beginning and like hyper focus that is required to do this, that I don't want to do that unless the person is like absolutely desperate for relief.
Mm-hmm.
Most people have what I'd call an undesirable but manageable level of discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
Or food is not thought to be the main problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a contributing factor.
Or even like specific foods aren't the problem, but maybe a bigger problem is they're going huge swaths of time without eating.
Yeah.
And then they're eating a larger volume of food that causes discomfort.
Exactly.
It's food timing. It's how quickly they're eating. It's, how well are they chewing their food? It's, are they distracted and swallowing a lot of air while they're eating and drinking with a straw? It's all of these things that are also contributing. And we're not paying attention to those things because it is so in our nature to want to find the one root of all evil,
exactly,
and get that out, because that is so much simpler than actually looking at your eating pattern as opposed to the actual specific foods.
Well said. And so let's think about what you just said there. So you have a client that comes in and they are a level of misery that they are just desperate for answers. We may move forward with an absolutist elimination diet as long as they feel comfortable with it. And we will work together to see how quickly we can remove foods that we are highly suspicious of, to see if we can get any sign of relief after a short period, and then we'll walk that forward. But if you shift it over, you have a client that comes in and they are uncomfortable, but it's manageable, which means they have time to sort through this properly. Right? It's, in my mind, an elimination diet is kind of like you have a cluster of yarn that's all knotted up. An elimination diet is you just take the scissors to cut it to get it to untangle.
Yeah.
Where if you have a knot and you're going to do a reverse elimination, you're actually taking the time to untangle it. And there's a time and a place to do one and do the other. So a reverse elimination is the observation that you have a client that comes in, they have uncomfortable symptoms, but it's manageable. And then we start to learn about what they're doing. And so that's when we're digging into what you just said. Their meal timing, their meal patterning. Is there, food recalls, symptom recalls? Are there symptoms associated with specific foods, or are they associated with environmental factors, how they're eating, when they're eating? They get symptoms because they're eating at 11 p.m. one night and it tends to be fast food. Like there can be things like that. And we'd want to rule those things out first before we start blaming ingredients and creating villains out of wheat protein. We should probably make sure it's not your current time management or processes or routine or rhythm. If we've ruled those out, we then may say, hey, this could be ingredient based. And there is testing we can do. We can do sensitivity testing. We can do other types of testing to see if we're suspicious to go downstream there. But at times it could also be worth, especially if you have symptom logs and food logs, picking the most likely ingredient. So instead of getting rid of all the FODMAPs, saying, hey, when we look through the FODMAPs, you consume lactose daily and it's multiple times a day. The other ones you don't consume with any daily regularity. So your symptomology pattern, which is a daily issue, not an erratic issue, would suggest that it's something that's occurring more often. So it's either perpetual because it's upstream of food and it's really not related to food, or if it is food, it's got to be something that you're eating consistently. So we're going to just remove dairy. And then we're going to see how much of your pie chart of pain improves. And then we'll see if we need to remove a next thing and a next thing. So a reverse elimination uses, whether it's AIP or whether it's FODMAP, it uses the same frameworking. The difference is it allows you to do one thing at a time, which feels less restrictive. It doesn't have this like super intense, almost like neurotic level of attention you have to pay. So it allows you to walk forward instead of jump forward. It's untangling the yarn. And I think that can be a lot more in two ways. One, it's a lot more comfortable for people, but I think the other benefit is that it ends up being a little more declarative. It's easier to really see because they'll remove the one thing and go, oh my God,
you have to
so much better.
Approach it like a scientist, and that's really what we're doing. And I would say another approach that we just take in general as dietitians is we're thinking not just about what to remove, but we're just equally considering what would it be helpful to add in.
Perfectly said.
Something like a probiotic, specific types of fibers that might be helpful. You may be doing a gut test and seeing what foods might help nudge them in the right direction in terms of their gut microbiome. So that's always something to think about too, because then I think our brains tend to go towards, well, I should be eliminating something. We're also going to be talking about what should we be adding in.
That's beautifully said. That's actually one of the things I was going to say about a reverse elimination. That's almost that next level, which is, let's go back to the FODMAP example. So we have a FODMAP diet. We have a patient that they're not, crippled over in front of the toilet every night, sleeping on the floor. They're uncomfortable. They're bloated. They feel gassy. They can't figure out why. And we have them do a food log, and through their symptom journal, we are suspicious that it's galactans, which is going to be a carbohydrate that's found in things like legumes and cruciferous vegetables, and to some degree in grains. So I could have them remove galactans from their diet. That is one of the options. Or I could give them Beano. Beano is the over-the-counter brand name for galactosidase enzyme. Galactosidase breaks down galactans. And for $7.99 for 300 pills, I don't have to take food from you. Instead, all I have to have you do is pop a teeny little pill 15 minutes before you eat galactans. And here's the funny part. What would happen if you started taking that pill and within a week, 90% of the discomfort goes away?
Yeah. I can't tell you how often I hear about this around Lent, because a lot of like Orthodox Christians will remove, dairy and meat from their diet for religious reasons during that time. And all of a sudden, they're having a lot of bloating and gas. And what I'm hearing is, yeah, they're also incorporating a lot more beans and lentils. It's a lot more cruciferous vegetables that their body isn't used to metabolizing all of that at once.
Our body makes digestive enzymes based on how much we consume those things.
Yep.
That's why vegetarians, if they return to meat, they have to do it so slowly because their body stops making the proteases that break down protein. Like vegetarians also have a better conversion of arachidonic acid to EPA than non-vegetarians because their body gets its omega-3s from non-meat sources.
ALA.
Our body upregulates and downregulates things based on what's around and what's available. And so, like you said, you start to see, a big dietary change. Is that actually that they don't have that enzyme, or is it that they just haven't had the time to make it? But in the meantime, if we know it's a temporary thing where they're going to eat this way for 2 weeks, we might just need to supplement that enzyme. And so I love that idea of, what if I didn't have to take away beans, which are great sources of fiber, and cruciferous veg like Brussels sprouts and broccoli and cauliflower? What if I didn't have to take those away? What if I could just give you a little pill that's super affordable and now you can continue living your life? And so I always, when we think about a reverse elimination, it's how are we stepwising forward in an intentional manner to rule things out? And then we get to have a combo. You come back in, you say, this fixed it. We go, great. So we have two options. We can either remove those things or we can supplement to account for those things. And to be honest, you don't have to have one or the other. It becomes, you are now empowered with the spectrum. Maybe these aren't the veggies that we keep in your everyday. Maybe we use green beans more often. Maybe we cook with zucchini more often. Maybe we prioritize other foods knowing that these throw you off a little bit. But then if and when you choose to eat them, it's never a no. It's a Papabino. And there are enzymes for virtually every FODMAP in this equation. And that's where people take broad spectrum enzymes, but sometimes a broad spectrum overpowers the gut because it's too many different types of enzymes. Sometimes you're better off surgically. And especially in this phase of elimination could also be used as a word identification. And so an elimination diet is the removal of to identify a culprit. What we're doing is we're not actually eliminating, we're just identifying. So we're using supplements to identify what could be the issue.
Yeah. Wow. So to recap, should I do an elimination diet? The answer is
what's going on with you?
Maybe. It depends.
Why do you ask? Say more.
Oh my gosh.